The crystal towers of New Valeria gleamed like diamonds against the purple sky, their surfaces catching the light of 3 distant suns. For over 10,000 years, these magnificent structures had housed the greatest minds of 6 different species, all working together in perfect harmony. The Valari people looked like living gemstones themselves, their translucent bodies shifting between colors as their emotions changed. When they were happy, they glowed soft blue. When afraid, they flickered red like warning lights. Today, every single Valari in the city was burning crimson. Commander Thelvara pressed her crystalline hand against the observation window of her flagship, watching another transport ship explode in the distance. The enemy machines called Reapers moved like a plague of metal locusts across the star system, consuming everything in their path. These weren't ordinary robots. They were smart, adaptive, learning from every battle and growing stronger with each victory. 3 months ago, the Reapers had arrived at the edge of Valari space with no warning. They didn't send messages or make demands. They simply began destroying everything they found. The first planet fell in 6 hours. The second took 4 hours. By the third world, the Reapers had learned to counter every Valari weapon before the defenders could even fire. The Valari military had tried everything. Their energy shields, which had protected them for centuries, meant nothing to the Reapers. The machines simply created new weapons that cut through the barriers like paper. Their quantum cannons, powerful enough to crack moons, barely scratched the Reaper hull plating before the enemy adapted and became immune to the same attacks. 14 entire star systems had fallen. Billions of Valari were dead. The survivors were scattered across space in whatever ships they could find, running toward the outer rim where they hoped the Reapers might not follow. But deep down, everyone knew the truth. The machines would never stop. They would hunt down every last Valari until their species was nothing but a memory. Commander Thelvara walked through the destroyed bridge of her command ship. Broken crystal panels crunched under her feet, and sparks flew from damaged control systems. Her crew worked desperately to keep the ship running, but they all knew it was hopeless. The Reapers had found their location and would arrive within hours. Her communications officer, a young Valari whose skin kept shifting between blue sadness and red terror, looked up from his station. "Commander, the last evacuation pods have launched. We've saved maybe 3,000 civilians from the surface. That's all that's left of a population of 2 billion. Thelvara closed her eyes and felt her own skin pulse with grief. 2 billion people. Gone. Just like that. The Reapers hadn't even bothered to study Valari culture or technology first. They had simply arrived and begun the slaughter. "Open a channel," she said quietly. "Maximum broadcast range. Send it through every hyperspace relay we can reach." The communications officer nodded and began working at his damaged console. "Channel open, Commander. You're broadcasting to the entire galaxy." Thelvara took a deep breath and began to speak. Her voice carried across space, traveling faster than light through the network of quantum relays that connected civilized worlds. "This is the Valari Coalition broadcasting on all frequencies. I am Commander Thelvara, speaking for what remains of 6 species and 14 worlds." She paused, watching another explosion bloom in the distance as more Reaper ships arrived. "Our civilization faces total extinction. The machines known as Reapers have consumed our worlds and killed our people. We have perhaps days remaining before our species ceases to exist." The commander's skin began to glow brighter as she continued, desperation creeping into her voice. "We offer everything we have to any species willing to help us survive. Our complete cultural archives containing 10,000 years of history. Our quantum-fold technology that can bend space itself. Our biological research that has extended life across 6 different species. Take it all. Just help us live." The message raced across the galaxy, reaching thousands of different worlds and millions of alien species. On most planets, the recipients read the desperate plea and immediately deleted it. Everyone in civilized space knew about the Reapers. They were unstoppable. They had destroyed dozens of species over the centuries, and no military force had ever successfully fought them off. Helping the Valari would only mean signing your own death warrant. Some species felt sorry for the Valari, but sympathy didn't win wars. Others calculated whether the offered technology was worth the risk of Reaper attention, and decided it wasn't. A few governments considered sending token support, but their military advisors quickly reminded them that the Reapers adapted to every weapon and tactic they encountered. The message continued traveling through space, reaching the Outer Rim territories where desperate pirates and failing colonies struggled to survive. But even they knew better than to challenge the Reapers. Most of the galaxy had simply accepted that some threats were too big to fight. As Commander Thelvara ended her transmission, she looked out at the approaching Reaper fleet. The machine ships moved in perfect formation, their dark hulls reflecting no light. Soon, the last Valari stronghold would fall, and their species would join the long list of civilizations that had simply vanished from the universe. What the Valari didn't know was that their message had reached one particular region of space where a very different kind of species lived. A species that had never learned to accept the impossible. 28 hours after the Valari sent their desperate message across the galaxy, something impossible happened. The quantum sensors on the remaining Valari ships began screaming warnings as massive energy signatures appeared at the very edge of their star system. Whatever was coming was big, and it was moving fast. Commander Thelvara rushed to her damaged bridge, her crystalline skin flickering between hope and terror. Report. What are we seeing out there? Her sensor operator, a nervous young Valari named Kethran, stared at his screens in confusion. Commander, I'm reading 12, no, 15, wait, 23 separate vessels emerging from hyperspace. But these ships, they don't match anything in our databases. On the main display, blurry images began to resolve as the mysterious fleet moved closer. The Valari had expected to see the sleek, organic curves that most advanced civilizations preferred for their spacecraft. Instead, they saw something that looked like it had been built in a scrapyard during a war. The ships were angular and brutal, covered in thick armor plating that had been welded and rewelded so many times it looked like metal scar tissue. Massive gun turrets stuck out at odd angles, and the hulls were covered with what appeared to be spare parts bolted on wherever they would fit. These vessels looked less like elegant starships and more like flying fortresses designed by someone who expected to get shot at regularly. Commander, Kethran said, his voice shaking, these ships, they're primitive. Some of their technology appears to be hundreds of years behind ours. But they're also massive. The largest one is 3 times the size of our flagship. Before Thelvara could respond, her communications officer suddenly jumped in his seat. Commander. Incoming transmission on emergency frequencies. They're speaking Galactic Standard, but with an accent I've never heard before. The voice that came through the speakers was rough and direct, with none of the formal politeness that usually marked interstellar diplomacy. Valari Coalition, this is Admiral Jake Morrison of the Terran Defense Fleet. We received your distress call. Transmit all tactical data on these Reapers immediately. Thelvara blinked in surprise. She had never heard of Terrans or a Terran defense fleet. Unknown vessel, this is Commander Thelvara of the Valari Coalition. May I ask what species you represent and how you arrived here so quickly? Ma'am, we represent humanity, and we came here because you asked for help, Morrison replied bluntly. Now, about those tactical reports on the Reapers. We need everything you have on their weapons, defenses, movement patterns, and ship configurations. Time is not our friend here. Aboard the human flagship Defiant, Captain Lisa Hayes stood next to a massive tactical display showing the Valari system. She was a tough woman who had spent 15 years fighting in humanity's colonial wars, and she had never seen anything quite like what her sensors were telling her. Admiral, she called over to Morrison, who was studying incoming data streams, I'm looking at these Valari ship designs, and some of their technology is centuries ahead of ours. Their energy shields, their quantum computers, even their hull materials are more advanced than anything Earth has produced. So how exactly are they losing to a bunch of machines? Admiral Morrison was a gray-haired veteran who had commanded human fleets through 3 different wars. He had learned long ago that superior technology didn't always win battles. "Captain, send the data to our analysis team and have them start looking for patterns. Sometimes the most advanced species forget how to fight dirty." Hayes nodded and began issuing orders to her bridge crew. "Commander Blake, this is Hayes. The Admiral wants those kinetic platforms operational in 6 hours. Can your engineering teams make that happen?" The voice that came back over the communications channel was tired but determined. "Captain, my people have been working double shifts for the past week, but we'll get it done. These platforms weren't designed for rapid deployment, but we'll make them work. We always do." On the other side of the bridge, Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Foster was reviewing the tactical data that the Valari had transmitted. He had spent his career studying alien military technology, and what he was seeing made no sense. "Admiral, I'm looking at the Valari battle reports, and these Reapers are adapting to their weapons in real time. Every time the Valari fire an energy beam, the Reapers learn how to defend against it within minutes." Morrison walked over and looked at the data himself. The reports showed battle after battle where Valari weapons worked perfectly for the first few shots, then became completely useless as the Reaper machines figured out how to counter them. "Interesting. So these machines learn from each attack and become immune to it." "Exactly," Foster replied. "The Valari keep trying the same types of weapons over and over, just with different frequencies or power levels. But it's all energy-based technology. The Reapers have learned to adapt to energy weapons." Captain Hayes overheard the conversation and walked over to join them. "So what you're telling me is that these Reapers have never fought an enemy that doesn't rely on energy weapons?" Morrison smiled grimly. "That's exactly what I'm thinking, Captain. Commander Blake, how are those kinetic platforms coming along?" Blake's voice came back through the communications system, sounding more confident now. "Admiral, the platforms will be ready in 5 hours. We're loading them with depleted uranium slugs, tungsten penetrators, and some of those new titanium steel composite rounds. If these machines want to adapt to kinetic energy, they're going to have to learn how to ignore the laws of physics." The Valari were watching all of this activity with growing confusion. Their sensors showed the human ships moving into combat formations, but they couldn't understand why these primitive-looking vessels thought they could succeed where advanced Valari technology had failed. Commander Thelvara opened a communication channel to the human flagship. "Admiral Morrison, with respect, our quantum cannons and plasma batteries had no effect on the Reapers. Your weapons appear to be much less sophisticated than ours. What makes you think you can damage them when we could not?" Morrison's reply was simple and confident. "Commander, your people have been fighting these machines the wrong way. You've been trying to outthink them. We're going to outstubborn them instead." As the human fleet finished its preparations, more ships continued arriving through hyperspace. These weren't reinforcements from Earth, but vessels from other species that the Valari had never seen before. Each ship looked different, representing technologies and designs from across the galaxy. "Admiral," Captain Hayes reported, "we're getting confirmation signals from our allied fleets. Everyone is in position and ready for your orders." Morrison looked out at the approaching Reaper formations and keyed his fleet-wide communication system. "All ships, this is Morrison. Remember, these machines think they're hunting prey. Today, they find out what it's like to be hunted." The battle for Valari Prime began at exactly 0800 hours, ship time. The massive Reaper fleet hung in space above the crystal world like a dark cloud, their black hulls reflecting no light from the system's 3 suns. The machines had been methodically dismantling the planet's orbital defenses for 6 hours, taking their time because they knew no rescue was coming. That's when the human fleet hit them like a sledgehammer. Captain Tom Reed commanded the destroyer Vengeful, a ship that had seen action in 15 different star systems and looked like it. The hull was scarred with burn marks from energy weapons, and half the armor plating had been replaced with salvaged metal from other battles. But the ship's nuclear reactor hummed with deadly power, and its crew knew exactly what they were going to do with it. All hands, this is Reed, the captain announced over the ship's internal communications. Emergency evacuation to escape pods. You have 30 seconds. His bridge crew looked at him like he had lost his mind. Lieutenant Danny Ward, his tactical officer, spoke up first. Captain, what are you planning? Reed pointed at the largest Reaper command ship on the display screen. It was 5 times the size of the Vengeful and bristled with adaptive weapons that had already learned to counter every type of energy weapon the Valari possessed. We're going to teach those machines that sometimes the simplest solutions are the best ones. 28 seconds later, the Vengeful's escape pods launched in all directions while Reed sat alone on his bridge, manually piloting his ship toward the Reaper formation. The enemy machines detected his approach and began firing their adapted weapons, but Reed's ship was already damaged and losing power in several sections. To the Reapers, it looked like a crippled vessel trying to limp away from the battle. They realized their mistake exactly 4 seconds before impact. Reed triggered his ship's reactor overload just as the Vengeful's armored bow smashed into the Reaper command ship's hull. The resulting explosion lit up space for 3 million kilometers in every direction, vaporizing both ships instantly and sending shockwaves through the entire Reaper formation. The Valari watching from their damaged flagship couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. He destroyed his own ship, Commander Thelvara whispered, her crystalline skin pulsing with shock. He killed himself to damage one enemy vessel. But the humans were just getting started. Commander Anna Walsh led a squadron of 12 Earth fighters, each one carrying enough explosives to level a city block. Her pilots were volunteers from the outer colonies, men and women who had grown up fighting pirates and raiders in the dead space between stars. They knew how to make every shot count because ammunition was always expensive and backup was never coming. Phoenix Squadron, this is Walsh, she broadcast on an open channel so every ship in both fleets could hear her. Remember, we're not trying to win pretty. We're trying to make these machines afraid to fight us. Her fighters dove straight into the Reaper formation, weaving between the massive enemy ships like gnats around elephants. The Reapers tried to track them with their adaptive targeting systems, but the human pilots were flying patterns that made no mathematical sense. They would suddenly change direction for no tactical reason, or deliberately fly into crossfire zones that should have killed them instantly. Lieutenant Mike Torres piloted his fighter through a gap between 2 Reaper destroyers, his cockpit filling with warning alarms as enemy weapons locked onto him. Shrapnel from a near miss had cut across his forehead, and blood was running down into his eyes, but he was still grinning. Phoenix 3, you've got bogeys on your tail, Walsh's voice crackled through his damaged radio. Copy that, Phoenix Leader, Torres replied, pulling his ship into a spinning dive that brought him directly under the belly of a Reaper cruiser. But that's okay. Back home, when you're hunting wolves, you don't run from the pack. You make them regret finding you. Torres triggered his ship's entire payload directly into the Reaper cruiser's reactor housing. The explosion chain reacted through 3 more enemy ships before the blast wave finally dissipated. Admiral Morrison watched the battle unfold from the bridge of the Defiant, his weathered face calm despite the chaos surrounding his fleet. The Reapers were adapting to human weapons and tactics faster than expected, their learning algorithms processing each attack and developing countermeasures in real time. That's when Morrison decided to show them something they had never encountered before. All ships, this is Morrison, his voice cut through the static of damaged communication systems. Pattern Delta 7. We're going to ram the sun. Captain Lisa Hayes looked at her admiral like he had lost his mind. Sir, did you just say we're going to ram the sun? Not ram it, Captain. Tickle it. Morrison turned to his engineering station. Commander Blake, are your people ready to initiate a controlled stellar destabilization? Blake's voice came back strained but determined. Admiral, my team has been working on this for the past hour. We can cause a localized solar flare that will propagate across this entire system, but the energy release will be massive. Our own ships will take heavy damage. Do it, Morrison ordered. The human engineering ships moved into position around Valari Prime Sun, deploying massive magnetic field generators that had been designed for terraforming projects. But instead of using them to move asteroids or redirect solar wind, the humans began using them to create artificial instabilities in the star's magnetic field. The Valari watched in absolute horror as the humans deliberately began destabilizing their sun. "They're going to destroy our entire system," Thelvara gasped. But Morrison knew exactly what he was doing. The solar flare that erupted from Valari Prime's sun wasn't random, it was carefully directed and timed to sweep across the Reaper formation while most of the human ships were protected behind the planet's magnetic field. The wave of charged particles and electromagnetic energy hit the Reaper fleet like a tsunami. Their adaptive systems, designed to counter directed energy weapons, had no defense against the raw power of an angry star. Ships that had been immune to Valari plasma cannons suddenly found their hulls melting under temperatures that matched the surface of the sun. When the flare finally subsided, 2/3 of the Reaper advance fleet was either destroyed or crippled. The surviving machines began broadcasting retreat signals, something the Valari had never seen them do before. Lieutenant Torres, somehow still alive in his heavily damaged fighter, opened his communication channel. "Phoenix Leader, this is Phoenix 3. I count 47 enemy ships destroyed and 18 more running away with their tails between their legs." Commander Walsh's reply was tired but satisfied. "Copy that, Phoenix 3. Not bad for a day's work." The Valari stared at the debris field where the supposedly unstoppable Reaper fleet had been. These strange humans had done something that every other species in the galaxy believed was impossible. They had made the Reapers retreat. "This looks like a straightforward creative writing expansion task, so I'll proceed without the advanced research tool since it's not needed for creative content generation." The temporary ceasefire lasted exactly 47 minutes. During that time, both fleets held their positions while rescue crews searched for survivors and engineers assessed the damage. The Reapers remained at the edge of the system, their dark hulls silent and motionless like predators waiting for their next opportunity to strike. But Admiral Morrison had requested the pause for a very different reason. Commander Thelvara and 3 other Valari leaders were brought aboard the human flagship Defiant through emergency transport pods. As they walked through the ship's corridors, they couldn't help but notice how different human vessels were from their own elegant designs. Everything looked functional and sturdy, built by people who expected their equipment to work under the worst possible conditions. The bridge of the Defiant was cramped and noisy, filled with the constant chatter of crew members coordinating repairs and monitoring enemy movements. Admiral Morrison stood in the center of it all, his gray hair disheveled and his uniform stained with smoke from the recent battle. He looked like a man who had been fighting wars for most of his life. "Commander Thelvara," Morrison said, extending his hand in the human greeting gesture, "thank you for coming aboard. I know this is difficult, but there are some things you need to understand about what's really happening here." The Admiral led the Valari delegation to a large conference room where a massive holographic display dominated the center of the space. With a gesture from Morrison, the display activated and showed a 3-dimensional map that made the Valari gasp in amazement. The map showed not just their local star cluster, but hundreds of galaxy groups stretching across billions of light-years of space. "This is what we know about the Reapers," Morrison began, his voice taking on the tone of a teacher explaining a complex lesson. "We've been tracking them for over 200 years, following their path of destruction across 47 different star systems." Red dots appeared on the map, each one representing a civilization that had been completely destroyed by the mechanical swarm. The Valari leaders recognized some of the locations, species they had heard about in ancient histories, civilizations that had simply vanished without explanation centuries ago. "The Kelthani Empire, destroyed 180 years ago," Morrison continued, pointing to one of the red dots. "Population of 12 billion across 6 worlds. The Reapers consumed them in 8 days. The Vorthak Federation, wiped out 93 years ago. 15 billion people across 22 colonies. Gone in 2 weeks." Commander Thelvara felt her crystalline skin pulse with horror. "Admiral, if you knew about these attacks, why didn't anyone in the galaxy know? Why didn't you warn us?" Morrison's expression grew grim. Because, Commander, the galaxy believes these species are extinct. But here's what the Reapers don't know, and what most of civilized space has never discovered. He pressed another control, and the map changed dramatically. Green dots began appearing next to many of the red ones, connected by thin blue lines that showed movement patterns across space. Every species the Reapers killed had survivors. Not many, usually just a few thousand out of billions, but enough to preserve their knowledge and their culture. The room fell silent as the Valari realized what they were seeing. "You've been collecting the survivors," Thelvara whispered. "For 2 centuries, Morrison confirmed. Every time the Reapers attack a civilization, we try to get there before they finish the job. We evacuate whoever we can save, and we bring them to hidden colonies in the Outer Rim territories where they can rebuild." Captain Lisa Hayes stepped forward and activated another section of the display. "Commander Davis, bring us those reinforcement signatures." Suddenly, the space around the Valari system began filling with new contacts on the tactical display. Ships were emerging from hyperspace in formations that stretched across dozens of light-years. But these weren't the crude, angular human vessels they had seen before. The first wave of reinforcements looked like nothing the Valari had ever encountered. Ships with hulls that seemed to flow like liquid metal flew alongside vessels that appeared to be grown rather than built. Others looked like they were made of pure crystal, while some seemed to shift and change shape as they moved through space. "Admiral," reported Lieutenant Commander Rachel Turner from the communications station, "I'm receiving identification signals from 63 different species. Some of these ship designs, sir, according to our records, these civilizations were destroyed decades ago." Morrison smiled for the first time since the battle had begun. "That's because they were supposed to be extinct. Ladies and gentlemen, meet the Survivors Alliance." On the tactical display, the reinforcement fleet was massive beyond anything the Valari could have imagined. Thousands of ships representing dozens of supposedly dead civilizations, each one bearing technology that combined their original designs with human engineering improvements. A Kelthani bioship, its living hull pulsing with bioluminescent patterns, flew in formation next to a human destroyer whose armor plating had been reinforced with Kelthani organic metal. A Vorthak crystal ship, its faceted hull refracting starlight into rainbow patterns, moved alongside human fighters equipped with Vorthak energy manipulation technology. Colonel Ben Parker commanded one of the marine assault ships, a vessel that looked like a flying fortress bristling with weapons from a dozen different civilizations. His voice came over the fleet communication channel, calm and professional despite the magnitude of what was happening. "Reapers, this is Colonel Parker of the Terran Defense Fleet. For the past 200 years, you've been hunting prey species across this galaxy. You've destroyed billions of innocent lives, and you've done it believing that extinction was permanent." Parker paused, and when he continued, his voice carried a cold edge that made even the Valari shiver. "Today, you learned something new. Every species you thought you killed is still alive. Every civilization you believed you had erased from existence has been growing stronger, sharing technology, and preparing for this moment. You've been hunting prey species for millennia. Today, you meet persistence predators." The Reaper fleet, which had seemed so overwhelming just hours before, suddenly looked small and vulnerable compared to the massive armada that now surrounded the system. Ships that represented the combined knowledge and technology of 47 different civilizations, all of them united by one simple goal, making sure the Reapers never destroyed another world. Admiral Morrison turned to Commander Thelvara, his expression serious but hopeful. "Commander, your distress call didn't just reach humanity. It reached every species the Reapers thought they had killed. And all of us decided it was time to stop running and start fighting back." The Valari leader looked at the tactical display showing the enormous fleet that had come to save her people, and for the first time in months, her crystalline skin began to pulse with something other than fear. Hope, bright and blue, began to spread across her translucent features. "Admiral," she said quietly, "how do we join this alliance of survivors?" Morrison's grin was fierce and determined. "Commander, you already have. Welcome to the pack." The coordinates led them to a place that shouldn't have existed. The Reaper homeworld sat at the center of a massive star system that had been completely transformed into a machine. Planets had been stripped down to their cores and rebuilt as factory worlds, each one the size of Jupiter and covered in construction yards that stretched from pole to pole. Millions of mechanical ships moved between the worlds like blood cells through cosmic arteries, carrying raw materials and finished weapons. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiant, studying the tactical displays that showed the true scale of what they were facing. The Survivors Alliance fleet was massive, but the Reaper industrial complex was something beyond anything they had encountered before. These weren't just military ships they were fighting, this was an entire civilization dedicated to nothing but war and consumption. "Admiral," reported Captain Hayes, her voice tight with concern, "our scouts are sending back data that doesn't make sense. Those factory worlds are producing new ships faster than we can count them. For every Reaper vessel we destroy, they're building 3 more. Morrison nodded grimly. He had expected something like this. "Captain, patch me through to all fleet commanders. It's time to explain why we brought every surviving human along on this mission." The communication channels crackled to life as Morrison's voice reached thousands of ships scattered across the star system. "All vessels, this is Morrison. I know what you're seeing looks impossible. The Reapers have built themselves a fortress that can replace losses faster than any conventional fleet can create them. But remember, we stopped fighting conventional wars the day we learned about the Reapers." Major Kate Wilson commanded a squadron of human drop ships, vessels that looked more like armored meteors than spacecraft. Each ship carried 50 Marines and enough explosives to level a mountain, but that wasn't what made them dangerous. What made them dangerous was that every single person aboard them was a volunteer who understood they weren't expected to come home. "Ghost Company, this is Wilson," she broadcast to her squadron. "Target selection is simple. We're going for the factory world's main production centers. Intelligence says those facilities can't be rebuilt quickly because they require specialized components that take weeks to manufacture." Sergeant Dave Miller, leading the demolitions team on Wilson's flagship, checked his equipment one final time. He was a quiet man from the farming colonies who had joined the military after the Reapers destroyed his home system. His specialty was turning ordinary objects into weapons, and he had spent the past week preparing something special for this mission. "Major," Miller reported over the internal communications, "my teams are ready. Every drop ship is carrying enough charges to take out a factory complex, but that's not the interesting part. We've rigged every piece of our equipment to transmit tactical data back to the fleet network when we make contact with the enemy." Wilson understood what he meant. The human military had learned something important during their centuries of fighting: information was more valuable than individual lives. Every soldier who died while transmitting data about enemy weaknesses was worth 10 soldiers who died in silence. "All ships, this is Wilson. Ghost Company is beginning our attack run. Remember, we're not trying to survive this. We're trying to make sure the people who come after us know exactly how to win." The drop ships plunged through the Reaper defense networks like stones thrown into a storm. Factory worlds the size of planets defended themselves with weapon systems that could vaporize moons, but the human ships were small, fast, and piloted by people who had no intention of avoiding danger. Wilson's ship crashed directly into the primary production facility on Factory World 7, its armored hull punching through defensive barriers that had been designed to stop energy weapons. As her ship broke apart around her, Wilson activated her suit's data transmission system and began broadcasting everything her sensors could detect about the factory's internal structure. The information reached the fleet network just seconds before the factory exploded, taking Wilson and her entire team with it. But their sacrifice immediately made every other attack more effective, as human commanders used the transmitted data to target the most critical systems on the remaining factory worlds. Sergeant Miller's demolition teams had crashed into Factory World 3, their charges precisely placed in locations that Wilson's data had identified as structural weak points. As Miller set the final explosive, he recorded a message that would be transmitted along with the tactical information. "This is Sergeant Miller to any human forces receiving this transmission. The factory complexes have a critical weakness in their power distribution networks. Target coordinates are being uploaded now. Make these machines pay for every world they destroyed. The explosion that followed Miller's sacrifice brought down an entire production facility that had been building Reaper ships for over a century. But more importantly, the tactical data his team transmitted allowed other human forces to destroy similar facilities with surgical precision. Admiral Morrison watched the battle unfold from his command ship, tracking the steady flow of information that each human sacrifice was providing. The Reapers were adapting to every attack, learning to counter every weapon and tactic, but they couldn't adapt to something they had never encountered before, an enemy that became more dangerous every time it took casualties. "This is Morrison to all ships," the Admiral broadcast as his flagship took a direct hit from a Reaper planet-killer weapon. The Defiant's hull was breaching in 17 locations, and half his bridge crew was dead or wounded. "We don't need to win perfectly. We just need to outlast them." The Reapers had been designed by their creators to be the perfect adaptive weapon. They could learn from any attack and develop countermeasures within minutes. But their programming had one critical flaw: it assumed that enemies would try to minimize their own losses while maximizing damage to Reaper forces. Humanity fought wars differently. Every human ship that died transmitted its combat data to the surviving vessels, creating a constantly updating database of Reaper weaknesses and defensive patterns. The machines found themselves fighting an enemy that literally became more effective every time it took casualties. Lieutenant Amy Foster piloted one of the last operational human fighters, her small ship weaving between the wreckage of thousands of vessels from both sides. Her fighter's hull was cracked, her life support was failing, and her weapons were down to their last few shots. But her communication system was still working, and that was all that mattered. "This is Foster to all Alliance vessels," she transmitted, her voice calm despite the desperate situation. "I'm reading massive secondary explosions across factory worlds 1 through 5. Recommend all surviving ships target the primary command complex at coordinates I'm uploading now." The final phase of the battle lasted only 18 minutes. The combined Alliance fleet, guided by tactical data purchased with thousands of human lives, struck at the heart of the Reaper industrial complex with precision that the machines couldn't counter. Factory worlds that had been producing ships for millennia went silent one by one as their production centers were destroyed. When the last Reaper command ship finally exploded, the silence that followed was almost frightening. For the first time in over 200 years, the mechanical swarm that had terrorized the galaxy was no longer a threat. Lieutenant Foster's damaged fighter drifted through the debris field where the Reaper homeworld had been, her ship's sensors detecting no signs of mechanical life. She activated her long-range communications array and sent a message that would reach every surviving world in known space. "Valari Coalition, this is Lieutenant Foster of the Terran Defense Fleet. The Reaper threat has been neutralized. All factory worlds destroyed, all command vessels eliminated. Welcome to the Survivors Alliance." Commander Thelvara, watching from her damaged flagship, finally understood what had happened. Her people's desperate SOS hadn't been answered by saviors who had come to rescue them. It had been answered by the galaxy's most dangerous predators, species that had been hunting the hunters for centuries, waiting for the right moment to strike. The humans hadn't just defeated the Reapers. They had turned them into an evolutionary dead end, proving that even the most perfect adaptive weapon could be overcome by an enemy willing to sacrifice everything for the survival of others. As the Alliance fleet began the long journey home, carrying refugees from dozens of supposedly extinct civilizations, the galaxy began to learn a new truth: humanity had never been the prey species that other civilizations assumed them to be. They were persistence hunters, and they had just eliminated the greatest threat the universe had ever known.